All right, we are with Annie Cúglas Humphrey. Welcome to Grow America. How you doing?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for having me on.
Good. I hope I got your middle name right there.
You did. It's
I
better
like.
than most. Thank
Yeah.
you.
I was like, I look. I thought I knew it, but I thought I better look it up. There's that little thing. So before we get into your interesting book on Irish and Norse type thing, which is quite fascinating, I'd love to hear a little bit more about the organization that you were in since 2009. Maybe a little bit about yourself,
Okay.
magical
So
practice,
in
just to give some context and all this.
yeah. So in 2009, my partner Matt and I founded the Kindred of Man, Man, as in of the Isle of Man. So we had both been interested in both Irish mythology and Norse mythology, but people were very clear to us that they were two separate things. They never met. And so in 2007, I went to University College Cork in Ireland. And so my then boyfriend, now husband, visited me, and we went to the Isle of Man. And we were blown away by how they had both Norse and Irish together. At the hotel we stayed at, the biggest stake was the Monanon, the Irish sea god and god of Isle of Man, and then the second biggest stake was the Odin. So, so we're like, wow, this is a place where Norse and Irish comes together. So we founded that kindred in 2009. At first, we weren't really sure where it was going to go, but then we were joined by Wayne Ragnar Worthy, and now we are a whole group of men, women, and other genders in South Jersey and Philadelphia, bringing the Norse and Irish gods to bear in our region.
Nice. So
Is
the Isle of Man.
is that British then, or is that Irish? The Isle of Man.
It is a British protectorate, but is technically its own nation.
So it's
Yeah, that's what I thought was so weird. It's kind of on its own in there, right?
It
Man,
is. It's a great place. I highly recommend to visit.
my dad used to talk about that. I was asking my sister, I'm like, why did dad talk about the Isle of Man so much? But he was fascinated by it. I guess our roots go back to, I guess, Scottish and English.
Mm.
And the name Dunlop was around there. But I was always, I never really talked to him a lot about why he thought it was so fascinating. But I've also learned that it's kind of more ancient than people realize, and a little more magical, I guess, too.
Yeah. I mean, they're also very well known for the TT, the tourist trophy, the big race around the island. But there's still plenty of history and really interesting stuff if you know where to look.
Right, right. So did you through this process of like trying to merge the Irish and the Norse together, did you come across what was some of the surprises you came across that you would realize that?
But, well, our biggest surprise, sort of the moments where we realized like we have to do something,
Yeah,
was
yeah.
when we were reading a folklore book. Now, the folklore books, it was a bunch of wealthy white men just kind of collecting whatever folklore they could and mashing it together. So it is itself not proof of ancient stuff, but it mentioned that Midsummer, the holiday, was the time when the Druids cut the mistletoe, and we know mistletoe is sacred to Druids. They cut the mistletoe so that Balder could be slain, because in Norse mythology, Balder's slain by mistletoe. And we were just like, what? And so our kindred horn, what we use to make our drink offerings with, has a little sprig of mistletoe carved into the bottom, because the mistletoe was sort of the cornerstone of bringing the two mythologies together.
Well, and then doesn't Christianity bring that in too for Christmas? Isn't mistletoe, or is that brought in completely separately to, because I just always remember mistletoe from Christmas.
Right. So mistletoe is supposed to like symbolize peace. And so there's not like a really clear message of where it comes from, but sort of the legend is that Viking chieftains would meet under mistletoe and it would sanctify their meeting. And so that's why we kiss under it, I guess.
So obviously, do you think that because the Norse were pretty active on the island of Britain throughout sort of the early 80s, maybe the 900s, 800s. Do you think it's sort of an extension of that, or are we going back even further than, like, are we going into prehistory, like pre-Christ?
Well, that's a great question. So when we first started looking at this, when I first started looking at this, there was a lot of assumptions that because both Norse and Irish come from Indo-European roots, that there would be like some really, really deep ancient stuff. But what my book is about is all this medieval material, this medieval records. So 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th century stuff. Talking about the integration of Norse and Irish worship and religion and religious ideas happening either contemporarily or contemporaneously to the person writing or within a couple generations. I'm clear in the book that I'm not saying this is absolute, definite, incontrovertible proof, but it's a whole book of information that has to come from somewhere. This is clearly there is more going on than the tales say, where just Ireland converted to Christianity and then Britain converted to Christianity, and that's the end. There was obviously a lot more going on than that.
So when
I was reading a bunch of those Bernard Cornwell, I forget his name. Cornwall.
Yeah.
Books about I read all the books that the Lost Kingdom was based on.
Yes, the Uhtred. Yes.
The Uhtred series. And it kind of really takes you through that it would sort of make sense that the Irish and the Norse could end up in bed together against the English.
I mean, they absolutely did. We have plenty of mixed marriages, but yes, they are also in bed metaphorically in terms of culture.
So does that? I mean, it's like the Norse were just far away to not get sort of swallowed up by the crown when that all kind of happened. Is there any record of the Irish? Is there Irish people in Norway? Was there any sort of retreat back there as Britain sort of took Ireland? I guess they didn't call Ireland. The Irish.
No. You're asking the right questions, actually, but you need to think in the other direction. The settlement of Iceland had a lot of Irish people. We know about that not just from the genetics, which show a significant portion of maternal DNA coming from Irish backgrounds, Irish and Gaelic backgrounds, but also the sources, as I say in my book. There are so many Irish slaves, Irish former slaves, Irish free settlers. It's a really, really strong contribution to Icelandic history, this big Irish component to it. And so the whole island chain from Isle of Man, Hebrides, Orkneys, Shetlands, Faroes, up to Iceland, and even pushing into Greenland as well, though I don't get to that much in the book. It's a space where Norse and Irish integrated fully, and people traveled between these spaces, and it was considered sort of in the same neighborhood because people were always moving around by ship.
Well, that must have been good for your book, though, because if you're merging the Irish and the Norse, and and that's where they ended up in Iceland. I mean, Iceland today, isn't it one of the most prevalent modern countries that hangs on to old fairy myths and all kinds of myths? I mean, they even structure some of their like civil infrastructure around some of these
yes, and this does show up in the book that in Iceland they have the Alvar, which we usually say as elves in English, and they absolutely can and do move around public works to not knock over these sites sacred to the Alvar. I got to see a fishing factory, I guess you could call it, in Grunewijk, where the whole thing had been constructed in this very awkward U shape because there was an elf stone there. But they have that in Ireland too. They have the fairy forts, the Roths, where again, bad things happen to people who disturb them. So roads will curve around them. The ferry bridge in the Isle of Man as well has this supernatural connotation. So it's very, very much in the air in the North Atlantic.
So is that mainly from Ireland or from the Norse too?
Like honestly, I'd say it's probably from both. I think it's less that it comes from a place and more that both cultures value having spaces that humans can't necessarily go. They value having entities that are not under their control, that they respect, but they keep away from it. The Icelandic thing was described to me as, Icelanders won't admit they believe in elves, but they will, you know, support projects that don't disturb elfstone. So it's a sort of funny, you know, we don't believe, but just in case.
Are those basically dolmens then?
No, in Iceland they tend to be natural features, whereas the dolmens are usually man-made. But while I don't get into my book, this whole idea of the glacial erratic and how like random boulders in a field have affected so much of human concepts of the landscape. So that dolmens are sort of the human version of a glacial erratic. And then Iceland, of course, is such a wonderful, weird place because it's so volcanic. And so the rocks have such interesting shapes. It's sort of no surprise that there's a supernatural origin to many of these rocky outcroppings in Iceland.
How much of the union between the Irish and the Norway and Norwegians, the
Norse, like, because it's more than Norway, right?
How much of that is based on the Danes, right? They used to call them the Danes back in the day.
Yes.
How much of that was based on slavery?
Ooh, that's a great question. So yes, absolutely. Unfortunately, the Vikings were master human traffickers. They were very, very big on taking people and pulling them away and selling them somewhere else. And in Ireland in particular, Ireland had basically cattle and people. And so Vikings generally found people a little easier to move onto boats. So certainly the movement of people, the involuntary movement of people was a not insignificant part of the Norse and the Irish interaction. Absolutely.
Kind of like, I mean, the Africans in the U.S. today, now they intermarry. Now you sort of see the same thing. I mean, the Irish, they really got the short end of the stick for a long time.
I will say that this early medieval slavery is rather different from the modern and the pre-modern slavery because it was seen as a temporary thing. It was very much a condition imposed on you rather than someone being born into it. And what's interesting too is that in the Norse sagas, they'll actually talk about Irish people who are enslaved but are also members of royal families. For them, they could be both, you know, born into royalty, but also temporarily enslaved. So I'm certainly not going to say it was a kinder, gentler slavery, but at least it was less permanent. It was not an entire race enslaved. It was rather a temporary condition.
How long? How long was like and then they just like let you go at the end of it? It was like
yeah, it depended. If you were going to be a rower on a ship, that might be do it for the next 10 years of your life and then, you know, not have much life left. Others, you know, maybe you would be the farmer's favorite concubine and end up his new wife when the old one passed. You know, it was sometimes years, sometimes decades, whatever the circumstances were.
That's fascinating. So you're talking the main I guess the main migration we're talking about from the Norse over, and this would be to UK and Ireland, was in the 800s then? So the early Middle Ages, I guess?
Yes. So the official start is usually 793. There is some indication that there might have been some less well remarked on incursions before then, but generally 793 for Lindisfarne in England and 795 for Ireland. Lambay Head in Ireland is usually considered the start date. So I just say 9th century, that is the 800s, just, you know, make a nice round number out of it. So I'm interested in that history between 800 and 1100. That's the main thing right there. Although, as you know, you'll see in my book, there's 12th and 13th and 14th century follow-ups to that as well.
Yeah, it's hard to know when I'm watching these shows. You know, I watch these shows on the Vikings, and they have them every summer. They're going out on their raids and then coming back. And I think a lot of those are based in the 800s. But you know, some people say, "Oh, these are wrong on history," and so you never know what to believe. But were they kind of doing that thing like every summer, going out and getting further and further, sort of at that time?
Yes,
uh,
and not only were they traveling in the summertime. In fact, one of the names for them was the Sommerlith, the summer warrior. And that actually
right.
became a name in Scottish. Sorley is Somerley, the summer warrior. So the McSorley clan is technically named for these summer warriors. But yeah, they would recognize that. Every year they could get a little further upriver. They could incorporate a little bit more of the local treasure, gather a few more local people to sell into slavery. And so before too long, they started setting up ship camps. They would overwinter. And then that's where the Viking towns come from these gradually less and less temporary settlements that come out of the summer raiding.
Wow, that's fascinating. I'm just watching this show too right now on King Arthur and how that. I guess it would be later on. I think after all that, but um, what about the Irish? What was I going to ask you? I think you keep or you mentioned in your book that this stays like there's a this pagan kind of, and I don't think it's not a religion, right? It's a lot more of a philosophy, but it stays like ends up staying away from Christianity, like protected from Christianity, I guess, even until today, right? Can you talk a little bit about how, especially in those early times from 800 to 1100, where it managed to kind of just keep going?
Keep ticking on.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know
Well,
how
I
to
like,
describe
yeah.
it.
No, I get it. And I like how you say it's not a religion, it's a philosophy, because there used to be this idea that there was this some like, total pagan religion that survived underground. And there's really not good evidence for that. But what does survive is this folk relationship with the earth around them. And so that is what has survived, as we spoke about with the fairies and the elfstones, this reverence for nature outside of what the church can provide. And so that is something that, I just feel like whenever you read about medieval history and they talk about the conversion, it just, some Christian missionaries rocked up and now everyone was Christian. And it's like, oh my gosh, but even if they're baptizing their children or, being buried in a churchyard, people are going to continue doing things that they were taught to do as children, that they saw their parents do, they saw their grandparents do. And so I do think quite a lot of traditions that traditions have made it to the modern day, or honestly, that traditions have been reinvented. That's kind of another thing I say in the book too, that like sometimes we get really into this idea of like, if something weird happens in the medieval period, it must be some ancient relic. But like medieval people can come up with weird things too, like the hobby horse and mumming and running around with a horned antler headdress. It doesn't have to be some ancient thing.
They were doing hobby horses back then?
Oh yeah, like the Cornish Avios tradition, Padstow May Day and things like that. I'd love to talk to you about mumming because that's sort of a whole other thing. But it's just people are always drawn to this idea of like animal-human hybrids and how people are supposed to interact with the nature around them. It's always there. And so yeah, it's not like a solid singular religion that survives, but this long-term desire of people to integrate and interact with the natural world that would not necessarily line up with what the church wants them to do.
Wasn't there a sort of it seems like there was a subtle infiltration of Christianity going on at the same time? I mean, it can't be a coincidence that Christ's birthday is the same day as the solstice. I mean, there's all these sort of alignments that have roots in paganism. How much of those just came along with Christianity, and how much of those were just the byproduct of turning a bunch of pagans into Christians that eventually just sort of merged into what we have today?
Oh my goodness, Darren, that is the question, isn't it? Well, you can spin multiple books out of that question. The big person here is Gregory the Great, Pope Gregory the Great, because he literally said to the missionaries going up to England that You know, people won't be comfortable with a religion that changes everything. Please take out the idols in their shrines and replace them with images of Christ, make them into churches. Please rename their holidays into ones that are more appropriate for Christians. You also have this big connection between Christianity and the political advantage of converting to Christianity. I think that doesn't get talked enough about, that a lot of these early medieval kings aren't converting to Christianity because they're particularly religious, but because they're like, whoa, those guys have so much wealth and so much connections with Rome and with all this other stuff. I want to get in on that. So I'm certainly not saying that there weren't sincere Christians among the converts, but I'm pretty sure there was quite a lot of monetary and political gain in conversion as well.
Yeah, people seem to want to apply all this. What's the word I'm looking for when people pietas? What is it when people are religious? Like everyone was super into
piety.
Piety, like everyone was super. Had all this piety back then, whereas I figure it's probably more of just a metaphor of today, just with different people. Most people were probably like, yeah, cool, God, man, I'm busy, I got fields to plant, I got shit to do. Same as people have today. Even most people that say they're Christian are not really, you know, there's just sort of this thing you say, and people seem to think that there was all this piety throughout history, whereas I think it was more the same as today, where 9 out of 10 are like, cool, man, I got shit to do.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like the church was the sports activities and the clubs and the hobbies and like everything that people do, you know, for fun, that was wrapped up in the church. So of course people were hanging out with the church and participating in church run events and things like that. It's not that they were, you know, blindly devoutly Christian or whatever. It's just that was the only game in town.
So what's mumming?
So mumming is this medieval practice of dressing up, usually as something that's animal headed, and then either just a completely human body, or sometimes there would be like additional structures, like to make into an abios or hobby horse. And then at various festivals, usually in the summertime, because it tends to be an outdoor thing, you'd run around the village. Sometimes you'd be scaring people. Sometimes you'd be asking for gifts, particularly of beer. Like it's like modern day, I don't know, Santa bar crawls or bachelor parties where everyone wears ridiculous costumes. People like dressing up. People like running around doing silly things. So mumming is you know often depicted as this, you know, ancient unbroken tradition. But nah, it was just medieval people having fun.
It's more fun than a serious ritual type thing, or lycanthropy.
Yeah. Well, it's stuff like Abbots Bromley in England has a horn dance where people put on these reindeer antlers. I mean, well, they're so big you kind of have to hold on to them. And they've been, whatever the term is, carbon dated, and also they can figure out where in the world they come from. And they're ancient, and they come from Scandinavia. So they were clearly brought over by the Norse. And so sometimes people are like, ooh, the Abbots Bromley horn dance is like this ancient ritual. And it's just like, nah, it was some guys who really liked wearing these horns and they brought them over. And like, that's the magic. That's the power that people still find it interesting and they're still doing it. Not that it's a pageant that is perfectly preserved, but rather that humans always find ways to reinvent their relationship with the natural world.
Darren, I have some sort of bigger picture questions about Christianity and paganism and stuff. Okay. Well, it just makes me think, because all this sort of imagery, right? It's being quite demonized right now, and some of the sort of the pop culture, you know, like, and I kind of feel like there's a revival to Christianity, but there's also a pagan revival and a revival to spiritual practices, and I appreciate both of them. But it's I guess, can you speak to it all about how some of this imagery gets demonized?
As in how
Like let's
nature
say
imagery becomes.
like Baphomet. So now anytime people mention goat
Mhm.
horns or any kind of horns, like all of a sudden, or like the animal thing, like the mummy on the head, like any kind of hybrid animal human thing, everybody gets into this like ritual that it's an evil demonic ritual kind of thing, and that doesn't mean that's what
Oh,
it is, right?
I mean, it's always been that way, right? Like we love Eggers the Witch, and he's depicting sort of this New England Puritan horror story that the natural world is out to get us. That's always been a big thing in Western European thought, that there is a division between humanity and the natural world, and somehow we are rational and scientific and all these things that nature is not. And so sometimes we kind of fetishize it with, a lot of colonialism is built into this idea that the colonizer is advanced, but the colonized is primitive in a spooky and spiritual way. And that's, what drives a lot of this sort of new age movement, where we're trying to reclaim a sense of balance, that humans are a part of the earth, but we don't have to like become completely primitive or completely completely abstain from all modern technology. We can find ways to integrate the two and grow. So this idea about demonizing, I mean, it's always been there. It's I'm sure it is not a coincidence that in the Western world the demon has horns, sometimes antlers, walks on hooves.
Yeah.
It's the devil is earth. Christianity is earth denying. You're supposed to not enjoy your time on earth. You're supposed to be getting ready for heaven. And so things like the devil and demons are earth creatures, and so you're supposed to abstain from them.
Would you say paganism and this heathenism would be animistic then?
Yes, absolutely. It's very, very much aware of humans as but one kind of being in the world.
Yeah. What about elementals? Earth, fire, water.
Yeah. Well,
spirits, elemental spirits.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave that to Wiccans and other groups that. Yeah, no, I mean they're close cousins. Like I'm not gonna malign them, but just the concept of the four elements is not really a huge thing in Norse-Gaelic mythology. So I will leave that to those for whom it is important.
Yeah, that's good.
But this I mean, if you want to think of the world as in an elemental form, I think the tripartite, the land, the sea, the sky, that would be more the awareness, more the conception.
Darren, what were you going to ask?
I lost it.
Oh, you lost. Okay. So what about this? How do you reconcile like your academic career and the PhD thesis and this book, which seems very academic, with an animistic type thing, like with a metaphysical belief, whatever that might be? Like, was that difficult, or was there challenges going through academia, but also being involved in this?
Oh, that is a fantastic question, Graham. I really appreciate it, because that has kind of been just this battery of my life that I am trying really, really hard to do, to do the hard, gritty, intense academia, the primary source analysis, the translating the original language, to do it well enough to get a PhD from Trinity College Dublin. Like, I know my stuff, but I also am still an animist. I am still somebody who believes in stuff that I can't necessarily prove by text. And so I do make very careful spaces between what I can prove and what has evidence in medieval text versus what I feel and what I see. And there have been times that I've kind of tried to walk away from that. I've tried to only be an academic, but it always comes back. It always comes back to, I do believe in this. And that's also partially why I wrote a, $20 paperback book instead of a great big academic book that costs $200 and no one's going to see. I think people do want to see this stuff. And if I don't write this book, someone else is, and they're not going to do as good a job. So, so that's why I kind of bit the bullet, and instead of keeping my stuff in an academic context, I purposely walk it out into the wider world.
And was it based on your PhD thesis then?
One of the chapters is closely related to my PhD, but sort of as I'm writing my PhD, I was realizing that I need to write this book, so I started keeping a little side file.
Yeah,
and I'm
yeah.
like,
I
that's
was
a little
thinking,
too weird for my PhD. I'll put it in the book. It's a little too outside, but then that's just one chapter. I've got stuff here based on what I did as an undergraduate at Rutgers, based on what I did as a master's student at UConn, independent stuff. Like it's a whole smorgasbord of scholarship from different regions, and also different parts of my life too, which makes it like a, surprisingly personal book.
Humans seem to be somewhat unique. Maybe, if not from an intelligence standpoint, we're more susceptible to the environment than really any of the other sort of creatures. We need to build these homes or have some sort of protection. I mean, beavers build lodges, birds build nests, but they're also sort of born into the world a lot more capable, and they've got
Yes.
sort of these instincts that are built in. So a baby beaver can get separated from its mom very young and still end up doing fine. Birds need
Right.
a couple of weeks and they're good to go, where humans can't even lift their head up for a year, and then they can't walk for a couple of years, and then you need 10 years minimum, 10 to 12 years of really protecting and nurturing those children, which is seems sort of separate from most of the animal kingdom. How does that how do these pagan and other things, how do they sort of rectify that with us? We are sort of an outlier to a certain extent, whereas if we rely on each other a lot to survive, we rely on even like migratory. I mean, you could argue that we evolved to be just at the equator where the fruit falls off of the trees and we never need the clothes, and we didn't. But for some reason, we've got this innate drive to go up where we need shelter. And like where I live, if you don't have shelter and heat, you're fucked. for nature is literally trying to kill you for a few months of the year. But then I can go out and see elk and bear and moose, run around just fine. They're crossing the river when it's minus 30 and getting out the other side and shaking it off and sort of going on with it. So I wonder if that susceptibility, what sort of brings these belief systems to the forefront, and the animism and the imitating animals, or is this more of a result of our domestication? Like if you take a pig and put it in the wild, it turns into a hog in a generation.
Well, I think you actually kind of answered this question towards the beginning of asking it, where you say that we as in humans need a community to live. We need that group of people around us to not only care for us when we're literally, like can't lift our heads up, but also when we can't walk on our own, when we're learning to speak, learning to interact with the environment around us. Humans are a social animal, and there are other social animals that won't survive without other animals to help them. Certainly not to the same extent as humans. But another thing too, Darren, is you say, you take a small beaver and it can survive. It can survive in a healthy forest. You put a small beaver in a, blank plastic room, it's going to die of no water and no food very quickly. So it's less that humans are alone in needing each other to make it to maturity, and more that our environment includes other humans. These animals with instincts to survive from very early on, those instincts are applicable when they're in environments that can support them. But for humans, our environment involves other humans. I teach world history.
Probably, right? And always has. It's sort of...
And always has, yes. Yes, when I talk about world history.
Yeah. And even the hunter-gatherers and the baby's still fucked.
Even hominins, I teach world history, and we start in prehistory. We start with Neanderthal and Denisovans and Homo naledi. Like we go right back to the very beginning, and this idea of cooperating with each other rather than having to remake the wheel, so to speak, with each birth is a really key part of humanity. So it's less that it's a weakness that we can't survive 3 hours after we're born, but more we are humans because we rely on each other.
And it's a superpower, because that gives us the ability to pass down information and build on generation after generation after generation, which is what puts us where we are today in this sort of
exactly
position.
Abstract thinking. Yep.
And
the ability to conceive
really
of the inconceivable.
They can't really pass that shit down. So I got to ask a question. I don't mean it to be combative. It does come across that way. Try not to take it like that. But you mentioned you teach history.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to be an interesting time to be teaching history when the status quo seems to be so at odds with what is coming out. And you may or may not agree with that, but on this show we sort of talk to these renegade thinkers all the time, right? The Graham Hancocks, the Randall Carlsons, all these guys. We've been doing it for a decade. We've been to Egypt. We're going to Easter Island. So you start seeing these ancient stuff, and you see the Cyclopean stuff, and I don't know if you agree, but from our perspective, clearly there's something going on here. There's there's something that these people were capable of that we can't do today. And I'm talking, I come from construction where I do it do high level construction, building hospitals, building skyscrapers, building airports. And then I go to Egypt and I'm like, what the fuck?
Well, just last night I finished David Grant's The Lost City of Z. And it's a little bit of a spoiler because it's mostly about looking for lost explorers in the Amazon. But ultimately, he discovers that there are all of these incredible structures in the Amazon, but they're like underground or very subtle. They're not like, boom, a city. They're like the footprints of cities or whatever these things were. So when people start talking about like what has been lost, I'm really of the opinion that, who knows what's been lost, because we might not even know what to be looking for. And the example I give, and I always emphasize, I'm not saying they had the internet in the medieval period. But what I'm saying is if we all of a sudden had some kind of Carrington event, all electronics stop, all, everything, and then, in 200 years, all of our laptops and cell phones are all going to be degraded. We're not going to be able to trace where the electricity was. And so in 800 years, people are going to say, oh, this weird dark age where fewer and fewer books were being made and no one seems to be talking to each other because they're completely missing the internet. They're completely missing a technology that's very important to us, but perhaps it hasn't survived. So I'm not saying that ancient people had the internet, but I'm saying, we don't know what we don't know about the ancient world.
Well, and you get to our level, you're talking about complete collapse, right? Like you get a Carrington event now, and there's nothing in 1,000 years. There's not, like, it wasn't a dark age, it's a stone age. It's like, the way the supply chains are integrated. And I was reading a thing the other day that says, there's not even one place in the world that can make a pen anymore. The shit to make the pen just literally is based on a supply chain. So it's like the pens won't even work, like once the supply runs out and you get a couple generations on, because you get cave paintings all over the world and petroglyphs that show the same sort of things. And you get so what's that like? Because you're obviously on the younger end of this coming in, but you're in a profession that is run by old white dudes who seem willing to defend the status quo to the point of calling the people that are challenging it, racist, all the buzzwords. You're all the buzzwords because you're saying things that we don't agree with. And, I don't even, because when Flint Dibble first went on Joe Rogan, I came away from that having a ton of respect for the guy. He was I was looking into him, and then over the next like 6 months, he just degraded into petty sort of the conversation got completely sort of lost somewhere in the thing. It's like he was unable to acknowledge certain things, and maybe there's reasons for that. Maybe it's stuff that I'm not capable of understanding. But after over a decade of interviewing some of the smartest people in the world, it becomes clear that there's more to the picture that some people are willing to defend at all costs. I mean, I would say Zhao Was is one of them. I'm sure you've got people in your own life that you're probably dealing with, even with this stuff.
Oh yes.
What is that like? Because you're sort of this, you're at the sort of the next group, the next generation of academia is coming up, and a lot of us on our side for the last 10 years have been saying the only way that these textbooks and shit are going to start to change what the evidence on the ground is for those old dudes to start dying off, hopefully of old age. You know,
we're not wishing ill, we're not,
no, but it seems like that's what it's going to take to get. I mean, I don't know what you think about Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson and these guys. Some of their stuff is kind of out there, but some of their stuff, I mean, I've been fortunate enough to spend 50 days in the field with Randall Carlson looking at the stuff that he's presenting on. And when I go stand at the edge of Moses Coulee and some of these places, I can say, man, there's no way that this wasn't caused by a torrential amount of water that happened quickly and at one time. So it's just sort of these, and I would say that younger Dryas stuff is sort of the one thing that has probably in the last 10 years crept forward the most into, it seems to be, poking its head into the mainstream at least. But I feel like you're sort of right in the battleground of stuff that you must know is common sense to you, but other people in the room think you're still nuts, or are they just well, at some level it's going to seem like they know they're wrong, right? Unless they're completely naive, they've got to give it some credence, some place. You can't convince them that nothing's changed in 50 years.
Yes. I mean, I won't get into the minutia, but there are very strong camps about what medieval Ireland looked like and what Norse integration into societies looked like, and I won't say that we get into fist fights, but there have been some shouting at academic conferences. Actually, oh my God, there was one time I got into a screaming match with an archaeologist in Dublin. Anyway, but no fist fights, no violence. The main thing, to answer the question at the heart of it, I will mention too that I'm a historian, not an archaeologist. I respect archaeology. I've done a little bit of excavating, but I'm not trained on it. I'm trained on history. And so to hold my own against.
Sorry to interrupt you, but that's kind of part of the problem. I mean, the archaeologists are trained to dig shit up properly, and I give them credit for that. But are they trained to interpret it? Don't you need a pretty solid understanding of history and prehistory, and sort of you need different disciplines interacting to get the full.
Yeah, and that is true. That is, you do need interdisciplinarity. Absolutely, that is absolutely true. But what I mean is, to answer your question, is as a historian, my realm is interpreting documents, and so because my realm is interpreting documents, I have to be nigh unquestionable. That's why I've taken so long to learn these languages, to, if not read the manuscripts themselves, then to at least see digital facsimiles of them. Because if someone comes at me going, this didn't happen, I'll be like, argue with the 12th century, man, And that's even when I show my students. I mean, obviously I'm showing my students primary sources and translation, but as soon as we're into Mesopotamia or whatever, I'm like, let's look at some cuneiform, because, I can just keep chatting at you, but you get to read what people were actually writing down and actually saying. That's where the information comes from. And that's who, if you're like, no, that's not what really happened, well, you got to take it up with the sources. That's where I don't want to say ammunition, but that's where the heart
the value
of the
is,
in the sources. Yeah.
So when you lose the sources, or you get back to some places where you got down to one or two sources, you got Plutarch for Rome. I mean, that's
right.
What if you fucked it up, So on that, how much do you think of history do you think is, because it seems like for the last 1,000, maybe 2,000 years, It's pretty solid. I mean, I was just reading a thing the other day that seems like they might have added some years in that sometime, but
Well,
that is,
I won't. I have friends who are calendar experts. That is a thing, so I will defer to them. I will say that so much of 19th century nationalism colored which manuscripts were collected and transcribed. And even in the 21st century, we're still detangling such national pride, national assumptions, national categorization of manuscripts. We're still undoing that. You will still have a English trained and a German trained scholar look at the same material and have different conclusions based on how they're trained.
and you have to assume
still,
that's not a modern phenomenon, right? It's been the same
no.
time after time after time after time.
Yes, that is true. That is true.
Change the home base. So how much of history do you think that we've got right? How much do you think we've got? I mean, you've got an unknown point that's always going to be unknown. And then you've got the stuff we do know and the stuff we think we know.
Well, I will tell you what I tell my students. History is not what happened. It's the story we tell ourselves about what happened. So in many ways, I think history is still evolving and still changing. And people think that's revising history like, ooh, we're just making up facts. It's rather, hey, instead of walking into this assuming that this document says this, let's actually read it and actually look at it. I mean, that's what my PhD thesis was. Everyone was like, oh, when the Vikings show up in Irish sources, they're always brutish, they're always nasty, they're always enemies. And I'm like, I am using my eyes and I am seeing far more than that in these sources. Let me tabulate how the Norse are depicted. And, a whole PhD thesis later, here we have all this stuff. And that was, one case of, hey, does it actually say that? And so that is what I think we're missing in history, that there are so many
1,500 years.
Yeah, there's just so many assumptions built on assumptions that I know to people it looks like we're just randomly rewriting history, but it's more we're pulling out little Jenga blocks and seeing what towers fall down.
Well, plus a good example of this changing history would be what you mentioned with the Denisovans and the ancient sort of all the different Homo erectus, I guess. I don't know what the overall term would
Homonyms.
be. Homonyms. But now there's 9 different homonyms, and the modern humans go to 300,000 years now, kind of officially. So that paradigm has been changing too, modern humans and how far back our history goes. So there is some movement with the mainstream narrative as well.
Yeah, I mean, even again, it's not my specialty, but the archaeology I did do was on Paleo-Indians in New Hampshire. And there we were looking at Clovis, assuming Clovis was the first. And even 20 years ago, you tried to talk about pre-Clovis, and you might as well say, they all came from space. But now there are multiple good sources of evidence for pre-Clovis culture. And so, I'm not saying you have to constantly have an open mind and there is no definites, but you just got to recognize that so-called definitively proven stuff is a lot more amorphous than I think people are willing to recognize.
Yeah, it would seem like the Clovis thing is almost proven at this point, that there was.
Oh yeah. There's way too much in South and Central America that's pre-Clovis.
And speaking of Indians, I'm an Indian, and when I got my DNA done, it's mostly South America, and the Mohawks over in Montreal and the St. Lawrence have been growing squash for thousands of years that are native to Guatemala. So there seems to be, a migration there that nobody. So it starts to seem like those people didn't come over the Bering Strait and down into South America, but the people that are in North America now came up from South America.
Possibly coming via the Pacific Islands.
Yeah, or possibly just being there from before the ice sheets came or whatever came. Because you start looking at, I forget that lady's name that found the fire pits in Mexico that were 50,000 years old. But I mean, without even getting into the woo or the the controversial stuff, there was 400 feet less water 15,000 years ago in the oceans. We were just looking at the map the other day. If you take 400 feet of water out of the Pacific Ocean, you can now island hop all the way to Easter Island, and you can island hop sort of the rest of the way across there. The ocean currents come directly out of West Africa into the Caribbean. And I think that there's an argument that there might have been some black people hanging around already, and it was just easy.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like the Indian Ocean was such a highway. Like people just do not recognize it. They just want to have this world where everyone just sat around waiting for Europeans to discover them. There was so much more going on. Oh my goodness. And that's one of my favorite lessons for my world history students, where I showed them a map of the world when the sea levels were lower, and I'm like, how many of you heard Bering Sea and assumed they walked over a sheet of ice? No, it was land. They weren't just randomly crossing a glacier to see what was there. They were just following the coast.
Well, yeah, you could have sailed the entire coastline. And I mean, the other sort of interesting one is that Noah's flood appears in almost every single culture in the planet. I mean, it's like
the Great Deluge.
Yes. Great Deluge is everywhere. I mean, around here, we're sort of the opinion that this could have happened multiple times. We could have got to where we are today, and then comet impact, pole flip, Carrington event, you pick it.
Who knows?
It's almost like you get to a certain level that you trade off this comfort and modern and technology for survivability. Because when that same shit happens, the tribes that are still running around Brazil and Africa, basically uncontacted, or even we look at them as primitive or whatever, they just haven't come with us into the future. But when that comet hits, they're going to just carry on.
They're keep on.
So I mean, we kind of figure that's probably happened a few times around here.
Probably, yeah. I mean, I forget where the source was, but to bring this back to paganism, a beautiful thing I heard was this idea that, like, if all religion was wiped from the world, if God forbid it was only children who hadn't been taught any religion survived, honoring the winter solstice would be the first holiday, recognizing that there's a point when the days will start getting longer again. And so to me, why not celebrate the solstices? Why not?
I mean, the equinoxes too. I mean, all of that stuff, right? All of that.
Yeah,
the lunar
the earth.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's
all these ancient sites that were pointing to these things. They have their celestial alignments, and there's solar and lunar stuff. I mean, even in Ireland.
Newgrange.
Yeah, Newgrange. I mean, there's theories about Newgrange being like an old temple. I'm trying to.
Hello, cat.
Yeah, sorry, the cat's getting.
The modern calendar is more tied to it all than we let on. I mean, the Christmas is basically the solstice. People think it's off by a few days, but it's not really, because it kind of sits still there for a few days. And New Year's should be on the solstice. Well, New Year's is there for a particular reason, because the days start getting a little longer on the 22nd, the 22nd, 23rd. But the first day, because if you look at the sunrises, the sunrise keeps getting later still, 26, 27, 28. You're still losing seconds in the morning. But your afternoon has made up enough time to make up for it. So the day has made up more time than you've lost. So the day is still getting longer. But January 1st is the first day that comes back again. The morning time, the morning sun rises earlier than the 30th.
I don't think we ever talked about that, Darren.
Yeah, that was Randall Carlson that showed that to me, because I think I was arguing with him one time about how the calendar is he's like, no, the calendar makes more sense than you think. If you start, they pretend it doesn't, but it still ties into all these ancient things that sort of make sense.
And I'm sure you guys know about the roof box for Newgrange.
Go ahead.
Just for hundreds and hundreds of years, there was no upper opening in range, so they didn't know that the winter sun would go into it. But there had always been these legends that it was the cave of the sun, and it's where the sun went, but it was just like a hole. And then it was recent excavation where they discovered that there was this roof box, and when they opened it up again, that's when the sun hits the floor in there.
Right. Oh, I forgot all about that.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, cool stuff.
I
So
just
did you come
republished
across
our
any of your what?
I just republished our Swagger show on Newgrange like 2 days ago.
Yay!
James
Excellent.
Swagger. Do you know James? Have you heard of him?
I don't know. Just Newgrange in general makes me
He
happy.
kind of weird, but he was an Irish guy. I believe he was
Mhm.
Irish. That we did the whole like 2 hours on Newgrange and the Dolmens and all
Ooh.
that sort of stuff around there. And I mean, the solstices are the one you find all over the world, right? The Serpent Mound and all these sort of things.
So speaking of Ireland again, just getting back to your research in your book. I mean, I don't know, this is kind of out of the book's purview, but did you come across any of the ancient myths and legends from Ireland, like the High Brazil or Tuatha De Danann or the
Well, I mean, the Tua Day means tribe of God, and so that actually referenced the Israelites. But the Irish clerics writing this stuff down said, well, our ancestors were the Tua De Danann, the tribes of the goddess Danu. So that's where it comes from. So absolutely, I encountered both folklore, as well as the Laur Gavala Aaron, the Book of the Takings of Ireland, has all the stuff about the Fir Bolga, the Men of Bags, and the Tua Day, and the Milesians from Spain. So it's absolutely there in people's awareness. And it's funny too, because I can't tell you how many Irish people I met where they meet me and I'm an American, obviously, and then they'll be like, oh, what are you doing in Ireland? And I'll be like, I'm writing a PhD in Irish history. And they'll be like, ooh, let me tell you about Irish history. And then they'll tell me about something and I'll just be like, yes, I just told you I'm writing a PhD on it, but thank you.
What about Hyperborea?
Hyperborea. Ooh, I think of Conan the Barbarian when I think of Hyperborea. Not a whole lot on Hyperborea. I do know about Thule or Thule and Iceland. Don't know too much about Hyperborea.
Interesting, because I think was that the Norse, Graham? Was it the Norse, or who is the?
Well, yeah, the north wind. It's the
Boreas is the wind, so Hyper is above the north wind.
Yeah,
fascinating.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to ask about sort of what do you see? How do you see the Norse-Gaelic sort of paganism evolving in this modern world? Kind of like, is there sort of a revival happening? Are you seeing that? Is it somewhat magical right now?
I think it's really magical. We've got Kindred of Man in New Jersey and House of Nine Waves in New York City. That's my besties group that it's not quite hived off of Kindred of Man, but it's kind of based on Kindred of Man. And honestly, Graham, I wrote this book to see what would happen. I wrote this book to see where it's going to take people. Because honestly, I would love that in 30 years, some young scholar is like, here's all the ways that Dr. Humphrey was wrong. I want that. I want people to read this and correct it. I want people to try it and say, wow, this didn't work for me at all. I want that. I want to see where it goes. So I don't know where it's going, but it's off.
Is there anything we should address that we didn't talk about the book?
No, we went places I wasn't expecting, but you've asked some very, very good questions about being an animist and an academic. That I'm flattered. So thank you. I appreciate that personal question.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of skipped over it, but I did want to know, and you kind of answered a little bit. But is there any myths about the Vikings besides them just being like these? What should I call them? What is the
barbarians?
Yeah, let's say barbarians. Like, is there any? Can you break any myths about the Norse that?
Well, well, the big myth in Ireland is that the Battle of Clontarf was Brian Boru, the ultimate Irish fighter, gathered up all the Gaels of Ireland and kicked the Vikings out of Dublin, and hurrah and hooray. Well, sorry, there were Norse and Gaels on either side of that conflict. And Brian himself had grown up in Limerick, a Norse town, and spoke Norse as well as Gaelic. He was 80, so he was an old man during the battle. He spent it praying in a tent. And the whole battle was to take Dublin, and they didn't even manage to do that. So Battle of Clontarf was much more a civil Irish war with a few external participants, and they didn't even achieve the one thing they set out to do. So, sorry, Battle of Clontarf fans, it was not that big a deal.
Where can people get the book and follow your work?
Well, they can find it on the shelves at Barnes & Noble nationwide, which I was astonished to discover. It's also being sold on Amazon. It is being produced by Inner Traditions out of Vermont, but they're through Simon & Schuster. So anywhere Simon & Schuster goes, you can order the book through your local bookstore or anywhere else you get your books.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Great. Yeah, thanks.
This has been wonderful. Absolutely. Thanks so much, guys.
Okay, take care.
Come back anytime. Have a good day.
You too.
And that was a chat with Annie Cúglas Humphrey. What'd you think?
Good. Yeah, that was fun. I got the links in the show notes for everybody for the books.
Why are you trying to stick up for the Vikings when you just want to be a Norse guy? Eh? You just wish you were Viking.
Well, I have like, I don't know, 5% of my, DNA goes back to the Northern Europeans and Norse, most of it from the UK. I mean, I'm a mix of all that stuff. So
less than
no, you know what, to be honest with you, it was a question that I had. I think it was either from AI or from the PR about the myths. And I'm really interested in that because you watch these shows and it's all, like rah, the Vikings come over and just plunder and then take all their thing back. But then people say, that's not quite like that. So I'm always curious as to know.
Well, they managed to be able to build cool ships and shit, right? That takes some sort of sophistication.
Oh yeah, they had sophistication and I love the magic part of the Irish and the Norse.
That's just kind of what happens when you get sophisticated and you're more sophisticated than your neighbor.
Yeah, we should have probably talked about more magic actually, but
next time. Big thanks, Annie, for coming on the show. Big thanks to you guys for listening. Even bigger thanks if you support us over at grimerica.ca/support. If you are getting some value from the podcast, we ask that you head over there and sign up, even if it's $1 a month. That's if everyone signs up for $1 a month, we'll shut the fuck up. People have been actually responding to that. So sign up today. Cost you $1. If you don't have a credit card, go buy a Visa gift card, pay the whole $12 1 month, a whole year up front. Then you just don't have to think about it for another year. Grimerica.ca/support if you can, when you can. GrimericaOutlawed.ca for the podcast. Contact@thecabin.com for trips and events, and adultbrain.ca for audiobooks, ebooks, and other. Other than that, we love you guys. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.